Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in Vault 22. So we are in Fallout New Vegas today again to talk about the spore carriers. So this is another one of our human-ish mutations, and it's probably one of the most creepy and unpleasant ones that I can think of that you come across in this game. Especially for a vault that on the surface sounds like it should be quite nice. You know, we've got flowers growing everywhere, there's some pansies by the looks of things. But unfortunately, there's also some very unpleasant looking creatures in here. So that's what we're talking about today. So your first place you would encounter them in Fallout New Vegas is here in Vault 22. There's a few different quests that can send you to this vault looking for various bits and pieces. So, oh, there's some daffodils as well, lovely. But the spore carriers do pop up in both the Honest Hearts DLC and the Old World Blues DLC as well. And the Old World Blues is actually where their origin is, from the X22 Botanical Garden. Calling it a garden makes it sound all nice, you know, and pleasant, but it's not. It's really not. This is all the opposite of that. I mean, I used to walk through when I was at university and I was living in Glasgow. This was quite a long time ago now. 20 years actually at this point, which is terrifying. But I used to walk through the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow on my way to the university. And it was a nice walk, especially in the springtime in the morning. It was, you know, it was pretty, it was a lovely walk, but this isn't going to be a nice walk in the park, unfortunately, because there's some horrific things in this vault. And basically, Vault 22 was connected to that facility at Big Mountain, and a lot of the research specimens that they got came from there to this vault. So this vault was one that hosted scientists over civilians. The goal was to study, you know, horticulture, agriculture, growing plants and things underground. Obviously, if the surface isn't safe, how do we get plants to grow to be able to provide food for people? So that's what they were studying here, and unfortunately everything kind of went wrong. So we are talking about fungi today, so you know, quite a lot to get into, but one of the kind of main parts of improving crop productions, you know, obviously you want to find ways of making better fertilizer, providing the right kind of light for plants to thrive, and water and all that kind of stuff. But you do also need to think about pest control and keeping insects away from your crops. So why am I talking about insects when we're talking about human mutations as well? Basically, one of the things that can be used to keep insects away from your crops is a particular kind of fungus. So in this vault they had a fungus that was called Beauveria mordicana. It's fictional, but it does share a genus with a fungus that is similar to the real life zombie fungus. So you might have heard of cordyceps as the zombie ant fungus, but there's also there's a lot of debate about the way fungi are named and things like that. It gets a bit complicated, but cordyceps bassiana or Beauveria bassiana are the real life fungus, and that's two different names for the same species because it has two forms. One that is involved in sexual reproduction, so exchanging genetic information with other members of your species, and creating what's called a fruiting body from which spores can be released. Whereas there's also an asexual reproduction form where it's creating spores and reproducing itself by basically cloning itself, and that's so the fruiting body sexual reproduction one is called cordyceps, while the asexual reproducing one is called Beauveria bassiana. So fungi basically do something that's called sporulation, and that means that they create these spores that can be spread around, and then those spores can grow into new fungi, a lot like seeds. But there is an important difference between spores and seeds, because some bacteria can also create spores to basically survive adverse environments and things like that. Is that spores are a single cell, while seeds have a developing embryo of a plant essentially inside them. So similar to the way they work, but different in terms of their makeup and how they're created. So spores can be quite resistant to things like heat. They can sometimes block the effect of disinfectants and things like that, and they can survive really dry or really moist environments with no adverse effects on them. So they're quite well protected, but you can usually destroy them by burning and other serious disinfection measures like that. And fungal infections are not uncommon at all by any stretch of the imagination. You do see them regularly, both human medicine and in animal medicine as well. So a particular example that I think is an important one. Oh, did you just fall over? Yeah, you see that one wasn't listed as hostile, but now it is because it saw me. So when they're hiding in the plants, they're not hostile to you until you upset them. Yeah, they're very creepy. But Aspergillus fumigatus is a very important pathogen in birds, and the bird basically inhales the spores, and then the fungus grows inside their lungs and air sacs and causes a really nasty respiratory infection, and it can be very severe, and it's also very difficult to treat because they need to be on expensive antifungal medication for a long time potentially. It's very complicated to treat, and this is why it's not advised to give whole peanuts in the shells to parrots, because there can be aspergillus inside the shells, and then when the bird cracks the shell to eat the nuts, it inhales the spores and then develops aspergillosis, which is pretty horrible. I've seen it too many times, unfortunately, in my career. So getting back to the zombie fungus, so Beauveria / cordyceps is related to the zombie ant fungus, which is currently called Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. Try saying that 5 times fast. So again, the genus of different species, that it does sometimes change over time, and as they discover more about certain things and they find out what's related and what's not related actually, and taxonomy gets a bit complicated. But the zombie ant fungus is one that infects insects and sometimes arachnids, but it's usually ants. It's specifically it's ants, and they infect the host and they take over its nervous system and make the ant climb up to a plant and attach itself to a leaf vein using its mandibles, its jaws, and that allows the fungus to kill the ant, grow its own fruiting bodies from the ant's body, and then it sporulates and spreads itself further. I'll put a picture in. Sorry if anybody's a bit squeamish about insects, but it's it's pretty horrible. And the fact that it's called the zombie fungus because it basically kills the ant and takes over its nervous system and makes it move, which is unpleasant. Whereas Beauveria bassiana doesn't do that. It doesn't take over the nervous system of the host and make them do anything, but it does kill them from the inside out, and then it grows and sporulates through their skin / exoskeleton. It's also less fussy about the host, so it will infect a whole range of spiders and insects and things. And because of that, it spreads very easily because it grows out all these spores that are then released from the body of whatever it is the fungus has killed. And it can spread very quickly, and this fungus has been implicated in respiratory infections in captive tortoises, and it's also been found as a potential infectious agent in American alligators and captive ones. And there has also been one case of a human infection with the fungus, which resulted in some serious illness for a person. The person was immunocompromised. That's one thing that you are always told if you are immunocompromised in some way. So if you've had a transplant and you're on anti-rejection medication, if you have an autoimmune disorder like I do and you're on immune modulating medication, whether it's biologic therapies, whether it's steroids or any of the other ones that kind of suppress your immune system. That's something that I have to deal with. I'm not allowed to eat fish sushi anymore, and all these kinds of things, because I'm on a medication that suppresses my immune system. It's also the same reason that I have to get the COVID vaccine twice a year now. But that having that immunosuppression, whatever the reason is, it can make you more vulnerable, especially to fungal infections, because a lot of fungal infections are kind of opportunistic. So, it happens when the host immune system is not as good, then the fungus gets the chance to grow excessively and take over and cause problems. And the main function of this fungus, the real life Beauveria bassiana, is that it is used as a biological insecticide, working against termites and things like that. It's also been investigated for potentially controlling mosquitoes as a way to prevent malaria transmission, because mosquitoes are the most deadly insect on the planet because of the malaria transmission. So potentially quite important. So when we're talking about what happened here, so the fungus that's here, as I mentioned, it's a fictional one that's obviously taken some elements from both the zombie ant fungus and the Beauveria bassiana and kind of merged them together, which isn't unusual because they're related fungi. Potentially you could have some kind of hybridization to create exactly what you would want here. But whether it was intentional or not, it kind of all went wrong, unsurprisingly. So the elements that this fictional one has is that it's kind of the best/worst of both of these fungi. It can spread really quickly, but it can take control of the host body after killing them. So yeah, we've got ourselves some plant-based zombies here. At least technically that's the case, because it's funny, like, when you think about, obviously people eating the vegan diet is becoming more common these days, so we talk about plant-based, and mushrooms are included in that, but fungi are actually quite far away from plants. That in terms of, their biology and things, they're actually more similar to us than they are to plants, but they're still considered plant-based, so I'm not going to argue semantics on that, but, because it gives us a fun term for these guys of the plant-based zombies, because that's kind of what they are. So basically, the fungus was here to be tested for pest control, particularly, I think, the praying mantises, of which you do find a lot in this vault as well. But a lot of the vault residents inhaled the spores, and there was an outbreak of some serious respiratory illness that killed people quickly. So I'll see, is the elevator, did I fix it on this save file? I did. Let's head down to the common areas. Because I think it would be good to find the clinic if I can. Clinic's downstairs. So yeah, you can see the plants have taken over massively in this place as well. It's kind of wild. The place is obviously fallen into disrepair because there's no people left. There's just plant-based zombies. So you say they're not easy to spot. You have to kind of take your time, and you can see the movement, or if you get the right angle. But coming through that door, it's not that easy to see. And that's what they do. They kind of hide in among the plants to, use it as camouflage, which is interesting. Clinic, this is where I was looking for. Because we can actually learn quite a bit about exactly what went wrong here. But even here, we've got all these plants growing up. There's ferns everywhere. So basically, people started becoming unwell. So the first case here, 162. Harrison T. Peters. So he's Dr. Peters. He's suffering from a severe case of pneumonia from some sort of microorganism in his lungs. Applied the usual treatment and requested he refrain from working and stop by for observation. So that's kind of the first symptoms people started showing after they inhaled these spores, is that it was pneumonia. So there was coughs, fever, chills. But unfortunately, the antifungal treatments aren't working. His body's rejecting the treatment, So, they are trying to do what they can to treat this guy, but his body's actively rejecting it. And eventually, talking about exploratory surgery because they're trying to figure out what is actually wrong with this guy, and then he died. So they were just about to start surgery, and he flatlined and did an autopsy, and there was a fungal infection, but the fungus still seems to be growing even though he's dead. And they're going to talk to the mycologists, which, if you don't know, mycology is the study of fungi. So mycologists are people that study fungus. That's what they do. To see if they can identify it. So the guy died. That's what happens, is that multi-organ failure, rejecting the treatment, and then they die. So you think that would be the end, but there's another case update for Dr. Peters, and was closing up for the day, and he sat up and attacked. So zombie, because he was dead, and then he got up and became this kind of feral monster. And obviously the final thought there, if all the recent illnesses are the same thing, because you can see here that there is more cases mentioned, and it's a group of people showing all the same symptoms, very similar. So this was, affecting almost all of the residents of Vault 22, if not all of them entirely. And part of the problem could be that a lot of these spores are airborne, so, when there's an air circulation system, because we're underground and everything, it could allow something like this to really spread very quickly through the population. So, as we can see, that's what caused this vault to fail. Everybody basically died and became these things. And you'd think that being in a vault, it'd be great as contained, but unfortunately that is not the case. So essentially, at some point not long after the bombs fell, from the dates that we've got, it's likely happened in like the 2090s, so maybe about 15-20 years, not quite 20 years, maybe like 15 years or so after the bombs fell. A group of people left Vault 22, and there was about 118 of them that left, and they made their way north to Utah and ended up in Zion Canyon, where they attacked a camp of Mexican survivors that had also made their way to Zion Canyon, and they were eventually dealt with by Randall Clark, the survivalist. So I do have a video about his story. Randall Clark, the survivalist, in Honest Hearts. It's a very, very interesting story. So I have created a video on him a while ago. I'll link it in the description, as well as I've got 2 videos about Vault 22 and exactly what all happened here. So I'll link that in the description as well if you're interested. Because we're mainly focused on the science of the spore carriers today, but the story of Randall Clark is one that I highly recommend. Either explore Zion yourself and find out, or I have got a video on it which I would absolutely recommend. But one of the things that Randall Clark, the survivalist, noticed is when he was spying on this camp of the Vault 22 dwellers, he noticed that they were coughing a lot. A lot of them had this hacking cough. So his thought was maybe tuberculosis, which also does, it's well known that it tends to affect the chest, although you can get tuberculosis lesions elsewhere in the body, and it causes this horrible cough, and can be quite serious. But unfortunately it was so much worse than just TB. These people also ended up becoming spore carriers, so that's why in several caves and also the Vault 22, their old campsites in Zion, you can find these spore carriers accompanied by the spore plants. So you maybe notice them. I don't know if there's one in here, but there are a few about. It kind of look like Venus flytrap sort of things. Really, really creepy things, but I don't think there's any in here, but they are about, and you'll find them in the caves in Zion as well. So these plants are related to the spore carriers as well in some way, because they seem to go wherever the spore carriers go, which is lovely. And that unfortunately is a problem because if it all just happened inside the vault and the vault never got opened, then it would be contained. But because a bunch of people left the vault while they were infected with these spores, they spread it to other parts of the wasteland. And given how rapidly it could spread, it could put a lot of, what's left of civilization at risk. But more than that, the first spore carrier was not here in Vault 22. It was someone who either worked at X22 in Big Mountain or was a test subject against their will, and they became patient zero. So patient zero is a term that's used when an epidemic of some sort breaks out. Patient zero is the first person to be diagnosed with whatever the contagion is. So they're kind of the epicenter, the beginning of the epidemic or the pandemic. So epidemic is a sort of more localized spread of an infection, whereas a pandemic means that it's spread wide and far across the world, essentially. So a country would usually have like an epidemic, or sometimes it can be more localized, an outbreak of food poisoning in a town that comes from one particular place. Whereas pandemic, as we know, recent experience, is wider spread, essentially. That's the definition, is the difference between those two. But yeah, it's not great. This fungus kills people and then resurrects them into mindless monsters, really. So in terms of combat, they're not the easiest things to spot. So you can kind of hear them breathing, and their behaviour's a wee bit weird because I've turned combat off. They don't, they're not reacting. So normally you can't target them in vats, and they're hiding in the plants for the camouflage. You can see actually as well, they don't have any eyes left, but they've still got their teeth in their nose, and then they've got these things growing out of their back as well. I kind of wonder if they were to go outside if they could photosynthesize. Who knows? But they tend to be hiding in these big piles of plants for the camouflage, and then they can only be targeted in vats when they become aware of you and come up to attack. So it's something to be careful of. But if you watch carefully, you see them moving, you see them breathing, and you see them twitching and turning their head. Whereas the plants don't move because there's no wind in here. So that's the way to spot them. But they can definitely take you by surprise if you're not paying attention. But when they're aggroed, they are fast and they do charge at you, swiping with their claws or lunging. Their attack patterns are very similar to what you see with the feral ghouls, really, and their animations are very much like what they have for the tunnelers and the divide, and also the trogs from the pit. So I believe the animation created for the trogs in the pit was reused for both the spore carriers and the tunnelers when Fallout New Vegas was made, because they only had 18 months to make it. So why reinvent the wheel? Makes sense. But if they're severely injured but not killed, they can explode into a shower of spores. So I'm going to see if I can... No, you're not strong. You're brute. You might... Yeah. No, killed them too quick. Yep. Someone in there. Get a weaker gun out. I'd say I want to just do enough damage to make him explode. No, maybe it won't. See if this works. Just gonna see if we can get a demonstration of it. Yep, there we go. That's it. Hi. Okay, so you can see, there we go. Perfect, that's what I was hoping for, was a good demonstration of that. So yeah, that's what happens when if you manage to severely injure them but don't kill them, then they explode, and it can do a lot of damage to you. Not when you've got God mode on, of course, but it does do a lot of damage and a lot of radiation damage as well, potentially. So there's several variants of the spore carriers. There's more coming. Well, I can hear it. Can't see it. Where are you? Where are you? Like those noises it's making. We're going to turn combat back off. So that's how you do that in the console. It's just TCAI and it turns off combat AI. Obviously. Oh, there's one. There's a little run. Why are you walking backwards? Yeah, so you can see this little tiny one, and so these ones are the smallest and the weakest. And we'll get back to why that is the case. Don't know why he's walking backwards, but that's what he's doing. So yeah, the spore carrier runts are the smallest and the weakest, so they have 50 hit points and they can do 10 damage, so very kind of small amount of damage really. When you compare it to the standard spore carrier, so the standard normal spore carrier has 75 hit points and does 25 damage. This is just the toilets. And that's just the way down, we can't go that way. And then the brutes, which is what we were fighting just there, most of them were brutes anyway, they have 125 hit points and do 32 points of damage, so, you know, quite a bit more. Just hop down. I still hear them, but I don't. Ugh, such a creepy noise that they make. Such a creepy noise. Yeah. So there's a spore plant. Spore plants. There's one of these rooms that has this one. Oh. This one. Here we go. This is the room I was looking for. So I think, are you the brute? Yeah, you're the brute. So that's the brute, and then the highest level one you'll find in Vault 22 is the Savage, which is 175 hit points and 50 damage, so quite a bit tougher. In Honest Hearts, if you have, you know, if your character's quite high level by the time you do Honest Hearts, then you can encounter the Spore Carrier Beasts, which are among the most dangerous. So they have 300 hit points and do 100 damage, so, you know, very, very dangerous compared to the standard ones here. In Old World Blues, you can find the Scavenger, which is a little bit weaker, so they have 250 hit points and do 50 damage. And then, of course, there's Patient Zero, which is the unique one. So Old World Blues has a unique variant for pretty much all the enemies you can encounter. So that's Patient Zero, which was basically the first sport carrier in essence. It has 300 hit points, but there's no stats on the wiki or anything about what damage it deals, so I don't actually know, but it's definitely tougher than the ones that you encounter here in Vault 22, which is interesting. And the spore carriers they're fascinating and they're awful. There's normally a key card there. I've either picked it up already or it's fallen through the floor. But I think it's also pretty awful given the outcome of what's happened in this place. So I want to come into this room because this gives us a real kind of picture of exactly how terrible everything was here. So we've got a double bed or two beds pushed together, and we have a crib and a pram, stroller, whatever word you want to use for that. And if we have a look with that, so we've got Spore Carrier Brute, we've got Spore Carrier Runt, and sometimes there is a normal Spore Carrier in here as well. So you know, this is obviously a little family room with, you know, a double bed and a crib, which means that the spore carrier runt, it's a baby, it's a child. So that's the thing. The runts are children essentially that have become spore carriers, and it's just wiped all these people out. It's really, really tragic, and I think the concern for me would be that, you know, the vault's open and it's been abandoned. You know, if the vault stayed sealed and they all were trapped down here, they would die off eventually, but it wouldn't affect the wider world potentially. But somebody's obviously opened it up and found, and people had left before anybody knew exactly what was going on. So it has been spread. It's been spread quite far, given that a bunch of them went to Zion Canyon, they went to Utah, so it could spread further and further potentially. So just another case of Vault-Tec's experiments causing horror and destruction in the wasteland and in their own vaults. So at this point, we shouldn't be surprised by any of this. This is what Vault-Tec does. You know, it's... but, you know, if it wasn't for all the horrific monsters, this place would actually be quite cool, because we've got all the flowers, we've got all the ferns and the vines and stuff, you know, plants, you know, pretty flowers and things. It should be a nice little place, but it's not. It's a horror show, because of course it is. But yeah, so that's what happens when you use zombie fungus to try and keep insects away. You know, sometimes you might be better off with a standard chemical insecticide, but maybe not. Some of those are pretty horrible as well. But yeah, so that's what created the spore carriers, where they came from, and the potential danger of them continuing to exist, because they're kind of like a form of ghoul, but they've been created by this fungus. I like the term plant-based zombies. I feel like that fits pretty well. It's on theme. Kind of puts a new spin on the Plants vs Zombies games, I suppose. It's like, well, why not both? But yeah, there we go. So hopefully you find that interesting. I say I'll link the other videos I was referring to in the description if you're interested. I say Vault 22, that we had a brief look at what's in the clinic, but there's a lot more happened here that I go into in those videos. And as always, I would highly recommend looking into the Survivalist and Honest Hearts, Randall Clark. I say I covered his story in quite a lot of detail in a video, but I would also recommend that you get out into Zion and find it for yourself, because it's a fascinating, harrowing and amazing story that I think any Fallout player should know, because it's really, yeah, and the way it's executed in the game is really good as well. You know, it's not something, it's an unmarked quest essentially to you know, to follow, to find all his little caves, all the places he camped over the years. And it's basically the story of a man who was off travelling when the bombs fell and couldn't leave to go home, and he eventually did go home and find out that his home was obliterated, his wife and child were gone, and he lived in Zion for a long time. And the impact that he's had on that area, it's a brilliant story, highly recommending finding out for yourself, or I say you can watch my video on it as well, because I think it is a really good story. So let me know what you think, and I will catch you guys on Tuesday. We're going to go back to Point Lookout on Tuesday to there's still a couple more sort of interesting locations there to talk about, and then we will move on to somewhere else for some more interesting locations. So hopefully you'll come back for that. I hope you've all had a good new year. It's yeah, time's marching on, but we're still here. And on Thursday I'll be back with my thoughts on episode 4 of season 2 of the TV show as well. I'm loving it, very excited to see what comes next, so I'll catch you guys then. Bye.